Hello, everybody. Welcome. And I'm admitting Jeannie. Greetings, everyone. And I know you're muted. Hi, Pam. Okay. I can't see everybody, but that's okay. All right. And welcome to David Lee, my co-host and presenter for today. Thank you for doing this with me, David.
Oh, my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
And I know that, as much as people wanted to hear from you and maybe a little bit from me, I have been sort of headlining with your miniature pincher, Minnie, and I wonder if she's with you.
Yes, it's so funny. Usually she's right by my side. She's not, but I will get her.
You need to get her because false advertising if she doesn't show up. And everyone, speaker view is usually the better way to go. I hear from my expert consultant on my Zoom calls, so I would advise you to do that. Oh, all right. So let's stop and let's introduce Minnie, who seems a little worried, David.
Hey, puppy. What? Do you want a treat? Do you want a treat?
We have said how resilient she is. Maybe not when it comes to Zoom calls.
I'll say a little bit about her later.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for allowing her to participate. And as I said in some of the write-ups that I did to tell you about today, she's an example of resiliency. She's a rescue. She's blind. One would say, my goodness, David, you took on a lot to take on a blind little rescue. But it says something about who he is, I think. And I have known David for quite a while. We are both people that our friends said to each other, I'm admitting, there she is. Hi, Sherry. They kept saying, you have to meet David Lee. And apparently his friends kept saying, you have to meet Susanna. So finally we did it. And I think that was 15 years ago. And we have been doing things together ever since. And this is our first virtual together. Well, no, it isn't. We had a course online, right?
Hero's Journey.
Right, but that was before Zoom.
Yes.
And that is the other thing that connects us. We're both fans of the Hero's Journey and Joseph Campbell's work. So we're not going to talk about that today. However, David, did you want to say any more about yourself before we dive in?
Sure. And just one thing, I noticed there's movement. I don't know if it's coming from your end because it looks like everybody else is muted. There's strange like staticky noises at times of movement. So
you know what?
What?
I bet it's the piece of paper where I've written all these questions that I want to ask you. I will stop rattling the paper.
So so just real briefly, my interest in resilience at the professional level first started as my first career was as a counselor working in the addictions field and then in the trauma field, and really became interested in how stress affects people, not just at the psychological level, but at the physical level. And then from there, diving into the resilience literature. And then for the last 20, 25 years, working in the corporate world in how stress and resilience affects employee performance. But long before that, I became interested in resilience on a personal level. And so it's been a really important part. All the practices that I share have been part of my journey. So, yeah.
And maybe going there right away, I know that you first encountered it in your own personal life, and I wonder if you just shared with us, if you felt comfortable, what got you interested in resilience in the first place?
Yeah, so there were two pivotal experiences that I had. And I didn't even know the term resilience at the time. And actually, before I share those, let me quickly define resilience because different people have different ideas of what that means. And I like to break it into 4 components because each component offers clues about practices to engage in. So typically when people think about resilience, they think about the ability to bounce back from adversity. And so that's an important component. And when I think of bouncing back from adversity, I'm thinking not just about major life events like getting laid off, losing a loved one, getting divorced or whatever, but also adversities throughout the day. So dealing with a difficult person, technology not working, getting stuck at a traffic jam. In fact, there's fascinating research that shows it's the day-to-day adversities that we're not able to handle that have the biggest impact on our health.
And David, as you well know, technology has never been one of those adversities for me. Could we let them know that we did a little practice and David saying, Susanna, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. But we're okay now. So yes, absolutely. Technology and those other things can definitely be a problem.
And ironically, often my worst tech issues come when I speak on resilience. I did sort of a demo for a company within the last year, and I did it on resilience, and none of their technology worked. And so just had to totally improvise. And it was neat because after they said, you definitely practice what you preached. You were, you know. So number 1 is our ability to bounce back from adversity. And there's practices that help that happen. Number 2, it's our ability to not sweat the small stuff. And again, it's the research shows it's the quote small stuff throughout the day that has the biggest impact. And so there's all kinds of practices that help us not be so reactive, but not all of life is small stuff. So resilience is also ability to respond at our best when it's big stuff. So when the pressure is on, when it's a demanding situation, etc. And then last but not least, I think of resilience as our ability to respond quickly and flexibly to change. Mm. And so like in the old days, like being stoic was enough. And the way I think about it is, let's say our grandparents being like a river barge or a tugboat and they can't tip over in the rough seas or the rough waters. But in today's world, you have to be a whitewater kayak, super durable, but also really nimble. So, and again, there's all kinds of practices that help us deal more effectively with change, with uncertainty, etc. Before I answer that question, did anything you want to say about that, or do you want us to go on?
Actually, what I'd like to ask you is, how would you like, as far as questions are concerned, are we going to wait until the end and then make time for questions, or did you want?
Thank you. How about if a question or two comes up, if you want to go for it and ask, and then we'll play it by ear in terms of if the rest of them we need to end off with.
Okay, and I will monitor that, and I'll also, if people want to ask questions in the chat, you can go ahead and type in a question and we'll have that too.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, so good to define it. And now, how in the heck did you decide to make this, I guess I could call you your life's work, right?
It is a major part of my life's work. 3, not 4. Actually, we did cover 4.
You see that too, okay.
Yeah. So it's bouncing back from adversity, not sweating the small stuff, being at your best when it's big stuff, and then responding flexibly and adaptably to
being at the big. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
That'll be important when we talk about the pandemic. Yeah.
Yes. So the first eye-opening experience for me happened when I was probably around 16, and my first job was working on a farm. And anybody who's worked on a farm knows the equipment's always like decades old. obligatory breaks down all the time. And so we're just about to go haying and the baling machine, the baler breaks down. And Farmer Bill goes, oh, okay, hey, Dave, can you go get the toolbox? We'll get this squared away. And I remember being so shocked that he didn't have a meltdown. Like he didn't make it into a big deal, sweating the small stuff, because that's what I had witnessed growing up. My poor father was like stressed out all the time, and so had very little time off from work. And so any glitch like put him over the edge. And so I thought it was a requirement, like something goes wrong, you lose your mind. Like duh, like that's what happens. And so seeing that calm and serenity was a response, was an option, really, I mean, as simple as that might sound, really opened my eyes to that as a possibility. And so just kind of pausing for a second. So for, you know, people on this live cast or watching the recording later, is maybe to think about like, what are those situations that you're most reactive in, and accessing, I love the term, the power of the pause. So accessing that between stimulus and response, and how can I, in that pause, practice choosing a different response. And in the beginning, it's to recognize that I do have different responses. And there's like all kinds of strategies that we can, you know, and that go into making that happen.
And we'll talk about that.
Yes.
It just occurs to me too, though, David, that it also depends on who you're with, and if they're part of that, and if they're not taking advantage of the pause, then that affects how you're trying to take advantage of a pause. Yeah.
You got it. And that's where, yes, it requires us to up our game, if you will, even more to overcome that. So that was the first, like, wow, there's a whole different way of viewing the world. It got me fascinated. But the life-changing event that I had that launched me into being fascinated about resilience was the summer job I had in college. So I was self-supporting. So I put myself through college, which meant I had no money. You know, I had enough to, you know, I lived on my own and I paid. Fortunately, I had a scholarship and all that, but I didn't have enough money to buy a car. And so I would hitchhike to school. I'd hitchhike to get groceries, to the laundromat, et cetera. So that got old really quickly. But working minimum wage jobs, I couldn't afford to buy a car. And so that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, a classmate of mine told me about this summer job that he had where he made 3 times of what I made the previous summer. So of course I'm all ears because I see a car in my future. And it was selling books door to door. And fortunately, I didn't give it a whole lot of thought, because if I had, I never would have taken that job. Imagine, super shy, low self-image. My self-image was so low, I was so shy that I wouldn't smile at a stranger. So let's say I'm going through the grocery, you know, line and the checker is checking me out. I wouldn't like, hey, how you doing? Because if they didn't smile back, I would feel crushed and rejected. And so
You've changed. I know you've changed quite a bit.
thankfully, yeah. And so, trust me, selling bookstore to door, having somebody not smile at you is like the least of your worries. And so, again, I didn't really think this through. And so what happened was so I grew up in rural Connecticut and went to school, undergrad at UConn. So they would send college students. This is a company that would recruit college students and send them all around the country, and I think all around the world now. And they would send you to different parts of the country so you wouldn't go running home to mom and dad as soon as things got tough. And so we got sent to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And imagine, even though I was living on my home, I'd hardly ever ventured out of Connecticut, never traveled on my own. And we get plunked down into Fort Wayne, Indiana. We have to find a place to live within a day and a half and start selling books Monday morning. So we get there Saturday morning, and the company gives us a contact. We call up the contact. It's a minister. And we say, hey, you said that you were nice enough to say you might know of a place to stay. And the minister said, I don't, but you can talk to my son-in-law. And there's just this weird, like, okay. So we call up the son-in-law, and he also has this kind of weird, like, okay. And so we go over there and we discover why the hesitancy and the weirdness. This hot opportunity was a halfway house. And we're like, okay, sign us up, because we needed to find a place to live and get selling books. So imagine living a pretty sheltered life, and now you're living in a halfway house. And fortunately, after a couple of weeks, we found like a regular place to live. But the first day, I was so terrified. So I went into like an upper middle class or upper class neighborhood, never seen houses this big and fancy. I was so terrified. I knock on the door. This is back when people were actually home, during the day. Well, now they are, but pre-COVID. And the door opens and I was so terrified. I take my book and I just like hand it to her. And he's like, okay, thank you. But that whole summer, I was up outside my comfort zone like every day. But a couple of lessons that have stayed with me ever since, and why I always share this story with people. Number one, the things that like sweat the small stuff before the summer, at the end of the summer, I'm like, yeah, whatever. No big deal. Things that would have thrown me for a loop, really challenging things, by the end of the summer are just like, yeah, bring it on. Because constantly having to step outside my comfort zone. So cultivated much greater ability to be at my best when I need to be, ability to bounce back from adversity, and also not sweat the small stuff, and just courage. The other thing that is so critical, and why I like to share that story, is the company had been doing this for like 100 years. And so they had it down pat, like how to help fortify and I'm going to talk about fortify later, these young students to handle the challenges that they'd never seen before. And so they engaged us in ongoing personal development, where this is back in the day of cassette tapes, we would listen to cassette tapes on motivation and self-image. We had a reading program. We had a weekly meeting to pump you up. And all that helped change my attitude, my self-confidence, etc. And again, what really informs my approach to this work is when I went back to college and I stopped doing those things, my self-confidence dipped. It's like going to the gym for 6 months and like, hey, that'll do it for the rest of my life. Like, no, it's an ongoing practice. So that's what really got me into it. And that experience, some of the points that I made, hopefully will be helpful for listeners.
That's interesting. And I think that going next, I want to ask you about the pandemic and how you feel, what are the challenges that brings to the whole resilience conversation. But I'm thinking too that so maybe you can comment on this, for all of us who have been out there in the world doing things, and maybe we had been leaving our comfort zone and trying new stuff, and all of a sudden we have to withdraw, come back to our little nests and shelter in place, not meeting people. So I get what you were saying, because I talk about it too, that it's a muscle that you have to keep using. We haven't been using it so much. So the pandemic has affected us in that way, wouldn't you say?
It's interesting because there is that piece in that we haven't been out and about in the world. But I actually, in preparing for this and actually thinking about this issue for a while, because I've been doing since the pandemic webinars on this topic, that I come at it from a little different point of view in that I one of the models that I think about, and it relates to your concept of a muscle in terms of resilience, is in, let's say, physical fitness. So you want to build strength and endurance. There's the challenge. So you go to the gym, you run 5 miles, you do your home workout, whatever it is. And then there's the recovery.
Mm.
Challenge recovery. And anybody who's really into fitness knows that it's in the recovery that you build your muscle. The challenge breaks down the muscle fibers. You need the recovery to get stronger. And one of the, and I'm really, well, as you know, I'm really into fitness kind of stuff. And one of the things that one of the people that I've studied from that he says that I love is, and anybody who's really into working out knows this, it's better to undertrain by 20% than overtrain by 5%
Mm.
because of the damage of overtraining. Okay. And so how I typically approach building resilience is this whole set of practices that engage ourselves in stepping outside our comfort zone. So embracing change, putting ourselves into situations of uncertainty, breaking out of our routine, which obviously COVID is doing. And then there's all these recovery practices. So we don't, just like if you don't do recovery in physical fitness, your body gets damaged and your energy gets lower and lower. If we don't do recovery in the emotional and mental and spiritual realm, we get depleted.
Mm.
So with that in mind, did you want to say something about that or?
No,
Oh,
I
okay.
see what you're saying, and I was reminded when you talked about leaving your comfort zone often that you and I, when we did that online course, we called it the courage to cross, and it was crossing over the line out of your comfort zone. Yeah. But that whole idea of balancing that with the recovery, I think that we forget to do that part a lot.
Absolutely. And part of that's one of the things I really emphasize and think is most important because people, and there's ways of doing micro recoveries too, which, and actually speaking of that, are you going to do show notes or anything like that? Here's why I'm asking is, I've got 3 free online webinars on resilience, part 1, 2, and 3, that I'll share with your peeps. Okay. Yeah.
Everybody's email, we can send it to them. Yeah.
Sweet. Perfect. And I go into this whole micro recovery piece.
Mm.
But the point I want to make that I think that the whole pandemic is bringing up is how challenged people are with dealing with, at the macro level, the uncertainty of it all. Not just what's happening in the world, in the economy, but will I have a job? Will I not have a job? The stressors of people who, let's say you're an introvert and you're sheltering in place with 3 little kids and your spouse, and all those demands. And so there's so much, so this part, the challenge part, is so huge for so many people. And so that's where I think really dialing up the recovery is so important. And so here are 4 pieces of that. Again, as I'm thinking about how to capture that. So number 1, and a couple of these are just going to be short and sweet. Number 1, there's 4 R's. Number 1 is rest. So to think of yourself as an emotional athlete, an emotional and mental athlete. So you're not running marathons or competing in gymnastics, but your work is very emotionally demanding and mentally demanding. And so if you're competing in the Olympics or any physically demanding sport, you have to dial up your rest. And so in these really demanding times, it's so important to be smart about dialing up rest, i.e. getting more sleep. So rest. Number 2 is recovery. And so obviously rest is like related to recovery, but recovery means after like your third Zoom meeting, like if you're working from home, it's like enough already, going for a walk in nature, getting up and dancing, having a fun non-Zoom conversation with a friend, doing some push-ups, something like that. One of the things I encourage you to do to build on this, and again, in the free webinars, it goes into more examples of recovery, but being conscious of throughout the day of after X amount of time at the computer to get up and stretch and move about. I'm sure a lot of people on this Zoom love being in nature, and that really feeds them. And being more mindful of what other things feed me. So rest, recovery. The third is refuge. Like, where do you find refuge? And so it could be a place. So is there a place in your house? Maybe it's in your car. Maybe it's in the nature preserve behind your house. Like, is it a place? Is it music? I was reminded a couple of days ago, as the music of Hildegard von Bingen. I think she's 13th century mystic. Her music is so ethereal, and it's like just such a portal to the divine. And so playing that, it'd been a little while since I'd played that. That is such refuge. I'm curious, let me stop for a second. If I could ask you, Susanna, like what would be a place that's refuge or thing for you? And maybe some other folks can type in the chat.
So this is perfect because just yesterday I made reservations to go to Baxter State Park in northern Maine. And those of you that aren't from Maine, it's it's about a 5.5 hour drive north from where I am, and there's nothing there. It's wilderness. There's no Wi-Fi. You see the stars so brightly. They shine they reflect in the water at night. And so I'm going there the middle of October, right before the park closes, and there might be snow, but it is such a refuge. Being in the wilderness does it for me. And I'm hearing from Jeannie, morning walks on the beach near my home. Absolutely.
Yes. Fantastic. Yes. I'll try to remember to talk about morning jumps in the ocean.
Cooking.
Yay, cooking. So before we get to the fourth R, I just want to, I see, Shelley, that you're on this. So I had planned on doing a shout out. Outstanding book, The Courage Way, Leading and Living with Integrity by Shelley Francis. And there's so I watched a really cool interview with Shelley and have been reading her book, The Courage Way. And one of the things that really stood out for me was Shelley talked about this, but in her book, for each stress reaction, an option exists to get us out of our corners, fortify. As when we take vitamins and essential minerals, we can fortify ourselves for the hard times. Fortitude is another word for courage. When Thomas Aquinas wrote about bravery in the 13th century, he used the Latin word fortitudo, if I'm saying it right, and held that courage was a disposition required for every other virtue. And I just love that, thinking of this in terms of fortifying ourselves. So getting enough rest, recovery time, refuge. And actually, before I get to relationship, I just want to read this quote from Joseph, our buddy, Susanna, Joseph Campbell.
Right.
You must have a place to which you can go in your heart, your mind, or your house almost every day where you do not know what you owe anyone or what anyone owes you. You must have a place you can go to where you do not know what your work is or who you work for, where you do not know who you are married to or who your children are. And so whether it's a physical place or a mental place that, I like David White talks about time outside of time. It's that refuge. And then the fourth practice for fortifying ourselves is relationship. And especially with the consequences of social isolation, doing whatever we can to engage in meaningful relationships that nourish us. and and as part of that, and again, that's like a whole other topic, but it's looking at, do I show up in relationships in ways that lead to nourishing relationships? Am I open, authentic, vulnerable? Am I a good listener? Am I attentive? That's something, for another time, but really not getting so caught up in the transactions and the doing of life to forget the relational piece.
Christine, when you asked what's a refuge place, and she said doing something with her hands, cooking, writing, even cleaning. And I would agree, even decluttering helps me too.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, Christine and Susanna, for sharing that with us. It reminds me of something. One of my favorite all-time books is by Bo Lozoff, and it's titled "It's a Meaningful Life. It Just Takes Practice." It's a little play on words because it's all about different mindfulness and meditative practices. And one of the things that he said, and I'm like, that is so true, is how that for most of us, we have very mental and emotional, relationally draining work, not physically demanding, that we need to balance that with tactile kinesthetic pursuits because we're spiritual beings in a physical body. And we can't forget that physical body. So even if like you tend to be more in the mental world, stepping outside your comfort zone to do more of those physical gardening, cooking, knitting, chopping wood kind of things. So yeah, thanks, Christine.
That is good. And before we leave it, because I'm going to ask you the next question, but show us Shelley's book again. So
Yes. So the Courage Way.
Okay, good, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So the next question, maybe I'm sort of segueing from when you were just talking, because you do talk a lot about the mind-body approach and that connection to building resilience. And I know that people want to hear more about what can we do. And let me just say, so many people have said to me during this time that they're tired, that there's such a feeling of fatigue. And we talk about it, it's the news, it's what's going on, and the ambiguity. We think we're going to start up again, and then no, we hear it's going to be 2 more months. Or I had one of my clients say, who's in education, say he didn't think education would be back to normal until September 2022, president of a community college. And so the fatigue I heard explained was part of that, is that we are undergoing so much loss. The loss of the way things have been. And so you kind of go through those same stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about. So help us, David. What would you tell us about the mind-body relationship and how we can work on this?
Yes. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned about the loss and you brought up the uncertainty again, that actually it goes back to the fortifying concept and the challenge recovery. And so in a non-COVID world, I oftentimes emphasize really strongly intentionally engaging in practices that put you in the unknown to strengthen that muscle of comfort with uncertainty, especially if you're really into control. So a person who's really into control really needs a lot of order in their life. It's especially hard dealing with uncertainty. So being intentional about doing that, given there's there's heavy doses of uncertainty going on. The other piece that actually, it's funny because the R model just came to me as I was working on another program. And I just remembered there were two other R's that I had forgotten. And so you're mentioning that reminded me is ritual and routine. Ritual and routine. And it's just like those people who either have little children or had little children, you know how important ritual and routine are to them to feel safe. And one of the things I was thinking about in terms of an analogy is that stage, that rapprochement stage of little kids when they're learning to walk. And so they go out, like leave mom and explore the kitchen, the living room. And then they're like, I've had enough of the unknown. They go running back and they like glom onto mom's leg, and that's the rapprochement. They get like refueled by hanging on to mom. Like we're like that. And so we need to intentionally create, like, make sure we have keep doing the rituals and routines that give us some sense of control and normalcy, and maybe explore with new ones that are up to snuff, if you like, are up for the challenges that we're facing. So, okay, now to the mind-body connection. So being a real geek. So back when I was in the mind-body medicine field and a real geek about the neurobiology and all that, one of the things that really hit me was so many of the people in the mind-body medicine field, they always talk about how the mind affects the body, like, oh, your thoughts stress you out and then they create problems, all that sort of stuff. And there wasn't nearly enough attention to how the body affects the mind. And so here's an example. I was like, it's kind of a silly example, but it's one that people can relate to hopefully illustrate the importance of knowing how to impact ourselves at the physical level. So, so this happened to me years ago, and it's happened many times since, but this is the first time that I remember it. So I was at the end of a multi-day business trip, and I was in the Cincinnati airport, and I'm just like slogging down the airport with my roller bag. So anybody who does any kind of business travel, you know how old that gets really quickly and how draining it is. The, airplane air, hotel air, lousy food, not good enough sleep, etc. So I'm just sort of like slogging along, and I'm thinking about all the stuff I have to do. And you know that feeling when you're tired and you're kind of beleaguered and all the things you have to do just seem really big. And that's what's going on with me. And then I happen to look over, and then like what to my wondering eyes did appear but a Starbucks. And so I wheel over there, and this is back in the day when I would drink these venti iced espresso drinks, so 4 shots of espresso. So we're talking jet fuel. And so I suck that down within like 30 seconds. And then within a minute, I go from like, oh, all this stuff to like, oh, that project I have to do, I could do this, this, and this. That thing over there, no problem. Like when you're totally jacked up on caffeine. And I was thinking later about it is, look at what happened here. Now, obvious, like at the risk of stating the obvious, my demands and the challenges obviously didn't change. But the important point, so the external world stayed the same, my internal world changed. But you think about it, my internal world didn't change because I engaged in positive affirmations or challenged stress-producing self-talk, all helpful tools. The only thing that happened was my physiology changed. And when my physiology changed, my emotions changed. And when that changed, my perceptions changed. I literally saw my world very differently. And when our perceptions change, we see opportunities, we see paths, we see solutions that we don't when we're like in this state. And so, and so, like when I'm working with a group, I say like, okay, the takeaway message isn't get jacked up on caffeine. Like that's not the takeaway message. It's how do we get skilled again at shifting our physiological state and our energetic state. So you gonna say something?
I bet people would put in the chat, give us some of the things that they've done.
Yeah, so please go ahead and do that. And let me share with you, I want to give you a little neurobiology here that hopefully will make an upcoming recommendation even more like credible and must do. But let me give you an exercise to do later. And so I've done this in webinars where to give people an experience of how your state affects your perception, that what I ask them to do is cue up the Sarah Bareilles video, Brave. So if you just go to YouTube, you can like write it later. Go to YouTube, put in Brave, and just do Sarah, S-A-R-A, and then Bareilles will come up. Do you know that video by any chance, Susanna?
I don't think you're talking about the Disney film.
No, no.
You're talking about the rock climber, right?
No. It's Sarah Bareilles is a really awesome singer, young woman singer. And the video is just wonderful. And it's all about being brave. And so one of the things when I've done online training is I'll ask people to in a moment to shut off their webcams and go ahead and play that video. And if nobody's around, go ahead and dance to it. If people are around, then don't have to, but at least stand up, because standing changes our physiology. Play the video, let the music move you, dance even better. And then when it's over, and I let them know ahead of time, and so I encourage you all to do this later, to write like, brave me would do this. Brave me would do that, whatever comes to mind, and or think about whatever a challenge you might be facing. And then in that empowered state, like brainstorm, like what are things I could do? What's in my circle of control to make the best of this? Like what could be my next steps? So that's a super, and one of the so back to practical. So that's not just a one-off exercise. One of the most useful practices that I use to shift myself into an empowered state is find music that really like jacks me up. And so this may sound kind of goofy, but I stumbled upon in YouTube epic battle music or epic inspirational music. And the epic battle music, like all these video game theme songs, I guess, given what the graphics are. But it's music directly impacts your limbic system, which is a part of your brain that processes and influences your emotions. So using music and movement to shift your state is one of the fastest ways of doing it.
I feel compelled to just share a different airport example. And then
Go
I'm
for it.
also noting the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I'm sharing my quick little example, you can make sure, David, what you want to leave us with before we go. And also we'll see if there's any questions. But very quickly, David goes to Starbucks Susanna's in the airport, the same kind of dragging around. I have to stay there for a while. I note the spa, and I march myself into the spa, and I get a pedicure, and I'm in there watching people go zooming past, and I'm in there having my feet massaged, and I feel like I'm in another world. So that when I leave there, same thing, David, I have a whole different perspective, and life is good. I love all these people rushing around. So there's different ways. My mother always used to say, go take a bath. You'll feel better after you take a bath. So anyways, what do you want to make sure these people listening take away from you, David, before we go?
So, two things. I want to end off on a quick story, because as most people know, you remember stories, not like bullet points. So practices that boost your energy level, and in the follow-up email, I'll give you a link to the segment on Powerups. And it's based on a TED Talk I heard from Jane McGonigal, author of Super Better. And there's some fascinating, and I talk about it it's like a 15 or 20 minute excerpt from the longer one, how doing little things that boost your emotional state not only make you happier and again shift your state so it shifts your perspective and you're in a higher performing state, but also the research that shows doing those little emotional uplifts multiple times a day literally changes your nervous system to be more resilient. And so of being involved in resilience field for over 35 years now, it's the most fascinating and powerful and practical practice I've come across.
Wow.
So I want to end off with a story. And it's a short one, so don't worry, Susanna. Good.
No.
So
I'm a facilitator, so I'm always watching the time.
Okay. And so one of the greatest mindset tools is tuning your brain to notice the opportunity in crisis. And some of you probably have heard of Napoleon Hill. He wrote a famous book in the last century called Think and Grow Rich. And he interviewed people like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Alexander Graham Bell, et cetera, some of the most accomplished people of the time. And he said one of the things that they did that, quote, average people didn't do is they knew, and I really want you to hear this, they knew that their greatest opportunities almost always came disguised as problems and catastrophes. And so here's the closing story that I hope will help you remember this. So it was a hot September day, Indian summer, about 10 or 15 years ago. And I'm power walking down this country road. And my left knee was injured. I couldn't run. And so I'm walking as fast as I can to get some kind of cardio going. But here was the problem. There were all these little caterpillars lying on the road, basking in the sun that growing up we call woolly bears, little brown ones with a little black, stripe. And so they're like relaxing in the warm sun. And I'm feeling bad for them because obviously that's not a safe place to be. And so I don't want them to get smushed, but also I want to get some cardio. And I can't stop every 10 feet and like, here, little woolly bear, shepherd them off the road. So what do is I take off my tank top and I'm like power walking down the road. And I'm like, whoosh, 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 like, except it's down here, whooshing them off the road like a big woolly bear windshield wiper. And of course, it wasn't until years later it dawned on me, that must have looked pretty weird, anybody driving by. But because I love the whole idea of story, teaching through stories, and every interesting moment can be a metaphor, I found myself thinking, wow, this is just like a metaphor for humans when life deals us this heavy blow, or this big cosmic whack side of the head happens, like the pandemic. And it's like, you think about it from the woolly bear's perspective, life is great, basking in the sun, all is good. And the next moment, like, I'm flying through the air and like smashing onto the ground. And so, like, they're like, if they feel it, but like being attacked, picked on, traumatized. But from my perspective, like the higher perspective, I'm saving their lives. And we're just like the woolly bear. So when we're in the midst of getting whacked, like the pandemic or all the other change, challenge, and uncertainty that happens, it's so easy for us to feel that woolly bear, see the woolly bear perspective and feel picked on. And what we need to do, so we're aware of the crisis, what we need to do is learn to see the gift and the opportunity. And the only way to do that, I believe, is, so here's like a closing exercise to do later, is to reflect on your life, all those catastrophes and crises and difficulties where it just felt like pain and misery and crisis. But now looking back on it, you see the doors that were opened, the opportunity and the gifts in it. And when you see from your own experience, like there was that time, what it does, it's proof. It's not like just a little motivational poster. It's proof from your own experience that, yes, in the midst of the woolly bear experience, there's that witness self that, if you can cultivate it, can also see the opportunity. And so I've been practicing this for so many years that even in the moment when I'm like, you know what, not happy about this, this is a real drag, I also am like, and I know there's opportunities here. What are those opportunities? There's gifts. And you do that enough, it tunes the brain like which FM station you're going to. So instead of getting locked on the crisis and disaster and oh, woe is me station, you begin to tune the tuner to pick up on the radio station about opportunities and gifts. So that's what I want to leave you with.
That's wonderful. There just might be a silver lining in this for all of us. So, David, how grateful I am that you took your time to share your wisdom with us. I know I've listened to you before. You've shared this with corporations and all kinds of large gatherings. And here you are on my Zoom channel, and I really appreciate it. I know maybe some people have to leave, but if there's anybody who has a question and you're willing to answer it.
Absolutely.
Oh, so Christine is saying radio station is a good.
Thank you, Christine. Absolutely. Because you think about it, all those radio stations are out there, and it's just a choice which one. So let's say you tune into a radio station that you're like, oh, I hate that music. You don't keep listening to it. You change it to another one. So we have a choice to train our brain to be able to go to that. So thank you, Christine. Hey, thanks, Shelley. Thank you.
If I may say briefly, I'm in a small community with a fairly significant aging population that is dealing with issues of resilience, since many of the people are retired. And one of the subjects that we're considering doing some mental health discussions on with the Health and Wellness Committee, of which I am a member, is the area of resilience. So I will look forward to sharing what you have said and connecting with Susanna and perhaps yourself at another time. But I have a Zoom call at 2 California time. So I will just say thank you very much. I'm going to hop off.
All right. Thanks, Jean. Thank you.
Pam says she has an aha.
Hey, Pam, do you want to share it?
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Hey, there you are.
Here I am. My aha, and you put the word resilience around it, is there's another pandemic going on, and that's our current political situation. And I have been struggling with a friend of mine who voted for Trump in 2016. And with each day since then, I just get angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier and mounting. And I talked to my therapist about it. I said, I need to resolve this. And I realized that what I wanted to hear him say was very unlikely. I wanted him to say, you know, I was wrong and I'm sorry. And I knew it was unlikely he said that. And finally, my therapist and I talked about it more and ended up saying, you know, I think what I need to do is let go of resolve in the traditional way that we kiss, we make up, and I need to mourn the loss of a friend. And since making that decision and practicing mourning instead of being invested in we kiss and make up, it has created some energy in me that I realized is resilience. But it came in a different package than I would have expected. And so thank you for helping me put a context around that.
Awesome. Thank you. And just to kind of play off that, one of the things that I'm working on is looking at people who show up in ways that I'm not thrilled about or believe in things I'm not thrilled about, is using that as an opportunity for me to practice being more spacious and giving people space to be who they are. And that's not always easy. So it's like, it's easy. It's like that saying, it's easy to be tolerant of people who agree with you. The challenge is, how do we be tolerant and spacious with people that we disagree with or people that we find disagreeable? So yeah, so I'm working on that one. Any other questions? No.
I'm going to email people. You can send me what you'd like me to send them, David, and anything else. You know, I know you have a book about having difficult conversations, so people would probably like to know about that, and we can include that in the email as well. And Christine is saying, interesting and helpful. Thank you. And I thank everybody for joining us. You never know at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday who the heck will be able to come. And it's lovely seeing your faces, Sherry. Wonderful seeing yours. Thank you. Oh, do you want to say something, Sherry?
No, just
You're just
interesting session. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry.
We need all the help we can get.
Me
Thanks. Good
too.
to see you, Susanna.
You too. Good to see you. All right. Thank you. And stay tuned. I'm going to
Bye-bye.
have somebody else on here with more light for our lives during this time, and I'll let you know about it.
Good.
David, thank you.
Thanks, Susanna. Great to see you and work with you again.
Same here. And thank Minnie for us.
I shall.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.